Why would they make fun of Oscar?
I'll branch out at some point. But you know what? I'm just having too much fun making these on cinema videos not to make more. From all your awesome comments, it seems like some of you might actually be getting something out of it too. So why not go ahead and do some videos on the Oscar specials? And hopefully in the end, paint a nice pretty picture of the tradition as a whole to showcase why so many of us gather each year to find out who's gonna win and who's gonna lose. And why, if you don't, you really should. So where better to start than the very first one?
If you love movies, if you consider the cinema to be your church, you guys are going to be in for quite an Oscar ride tonight.
The On Cinema Oscar Special is a pretty fascinating institution. It's live streamed at the exact same time as the actual Oscars, the event their show is meant to be celebrating, so its very existence is kind of a paradox.
We all know what Oscar is, but what we do is we analyze the night in real time.
The audience that would care enough about watching the Oscars to be at all interested in an Oscar commentary show would be unable to watch it, as they would presumably be busy watching the actual Academy Awards.
The Oscars are they're happening right now, folks. If you want to tune in on them, you'll find out probably quicker than we will.
Instead, we're invited to essentially ignore the Academy Awards altogether and be sucked into Tim Heidecker and Gregg Turkington's world of film expertise and rageaholism once again. And hey, I know which one I watch every year. Of course, that's kind of the point. Their very existence doesn't quite make sense. The Oscar special is a testament to the scope of On Cinema. It's amazing that on top of all of the other content that comprises this universe, there's a yearly multi-hour live performance that becomes increasingly elaborate each year. I know I've said it about everything On Cinema related I've talked about on this channel so far, but I have to reiterate because it applies here too. The Oscar specials are yet another incredibly unique piece of media. I'm unaware of really anything like it, at least nothing nearly this funny. They're even unique within the category of On Cinema projects because they're not just elongated episodes of the show. Because they're live productions, they're yet another medium for the show to play with, and there's so much variety that comes with that concept. It goes a long way to differentiating and defining the identity and the style of humor of the On Cinema Oscar special, and builds up different expectations than we would have for other properties. So to frame this video and keep me from rambling too much, I'll talk about how the first annual establishes some of these formulas as we break down what happens. The first annual live On Cinema Oscar special came out in 2013 after the first season of On Cinema had already aired. The Oscar specials over the years have evolved to get bigger and crazier.
I'm already dead, motherfucker!
With more guests, more sets, more segments, more accidents, and more story moments, more inclusion of the surrounding context of the show. But the first one is really quite simple. In terms of the overall story of On Cinema, it's a pretty self-contained entry. This was back in the days of On Cinema, in which the show was mostly constrained to its core concept of Tim and Gregg reviewing movies, so there wasn't a lot of plot yet to incorporate. Instead, in the spirit of the first season of the show being at its most straightforward, so too was the first Oscar special, the bare bones version of the concept, without the bells and whistles and mostly without any real plot implications. This is not a criticism of the first annual at all, far from it. I would still put it in contention as being one of the funniest ones they ever did, and there's so many elements established here that have carried on all the way through the rest. In a way, what makes this one work so well is that simplicity and the fact that it's so much more cheaply produced. The quality is so poor, the behavior so unprofessional, the concept so wholly unnecessary.
I had predicted that she would win, or I predicted that Sally Field would win, but also I thought that she would win too.
It benefits from this simplicity in the way that it plays out and looks just how we'd imagine these two characters self-producing a live event for the first time would. That they would go into it underprepared.
Do we have a name of a Halle Berry movie?
Play it.
Who is this? What part of the card awards is this? I'm lost. I'm lost. I don't know what you want me to say.
That they wouldn't organize the night with much variety and would assume their insights and self-indulgent rants to be entertainment enough.
Tom Hanks is one of my favorite actors, but hasn't had a hit lately, but you know, he will. He could play a sort of an older character at this point because he is aging.
Mm-hmm. All right.
That the clarity in studio design would be lacking, and little things like they wouldn't have a chair for their special guest.
Get out of the way so you can see the shot of you from the movie that's on the screen.
Oh, that's me.
It works so well as a believably undercooked premise, the result of Tim and Gregg making their own earnest attempts at creating a live event show with limited funding. Let's start from the beginning.
Welcome to the big show.
Right off the bat, the tone for the evening is set with confusion and difficulty in the most quintessentially On Cinema way possible.
I went fishing yesterday. About a quarter or half inch of the tip of this finger got cut off.
Not a minute into Oscar night, Tim is already explaining an injury, and Gregg is sort of passive-aggressively chastising him.
That's why you should just go to the supermarket where they sell fish.
I was using it to relax.
It doesn't look very relaxing.
Gregg's strong opinion on the merits of fishing as an activity, which are repeated twice in this special.
There's no reason to be driving 100 miles to go fishing in some lake when we could easily just go to Ralph's and get all the fish we wanted.
are a great representation of his ego, whether it's a simple way of indirectly challenging Tim or just a complete misunderstanding of the motive. Gregg offers up his famous specialty to further set the tone, strong opinions and assertions where none are called for. This is also one of the earliest moments I can think of in which Gregg's attitude toward Tim's ailments seems to suggest the fault is on him for doing whatever he's doing. As if to say, that's what you get for doing something other than watching and reviewing movies. I think it's a potentially more significant moment to cite in the evolution of their relationship than it would initially seem. It starts off feeling like an On Cinema episode, but we're caught off guard with this immediate realization of underpreparedness that takes the wind out of Tim's sails. As the evening continues, they surprisingly do talk about the Oscars a good amount here, though their insights are less than impressive.
Amy Adams.
Never heard of her.
He's not wearing a traditional tuxedo. It's more of a gray-black tuxedo.
And that's his wife.
Gregg, as a purported expert,
I wouldn't say purported,
begins to share his insights about the Academy and how the nominees and winners are chosen, what Oscar likes to reward, and what kinds of tricks Oscar plays.
Oscar is a sentimental beast. Sometimes they'll reward them not so much for their current film, but for the past. But sometimes it's politics with Oscars. Sometimes they will it's misdirection, like any magician can tell you.
This is an absolutely integral part of the Oscar special genre, and it's out in full force in the first annual. There are so many hilarious examples of Gregg speaking so confidently on the subject of the awards.
I'm an Oscar booster, but sometimes they get it wrong.
Whether he's explaining how they work or proposing how he believes they should.
I believe that you should present the winner for the best picture in a movie theater. There's enough movies that come out. There would be no problem with having July Oscars and a February Oscars. To host the Oscars, you should have won an Oscar. That's rule number one.
All right, well, I don't know about that, but
it's plain to see his pontificating isn't meant to genuinely educate, but instead is more of an effort to reinforce his image as an expert who knows more than the general public. Often amidst these speeches, he's flat out wrong.
Ang Lee they're not going to give the Oscar to a woman.
As he talks more, the feeling sinks deeper and deeper that these two men are shockingly unqualified to be running an event like this, but neither have a clue of that fact. Both Tim and Gregg are providing such an enormous degree of bullshitting to the point they seem to genuinely believe in their own nonsense.
How many people out there, I wonder, think that they know everything there is to know about Oscar?
Oscar talk really is some of the best Gregg content for me. The way he can go on and on, always personifying Oscar and claiming inside information. One of my favorite examples that continues on into later Oscar specials is Gregg's insistence on write-in candidates.
Fortunately, this year they do have the write-in ballot available.
Though, of course, this is not a possibility. Gregg is steadfast in his belief that The Hobbit will win 8 awards despite not being nominated for any.
The winning film will be The Hobbit. Peter Jackson for The Hobbit is going to be the write-in favorite. I think Cate Blanchett for The Hobbit is going to get the popular vote. 8 Oscars in total for The Hobbit, for The Hobbit.
We know from the first season of On Cinema how much of a Hobbit head Gregg is.
Bilbo Baggins, the Hobbit himself. He's sort of a personal hero of mine. 5 bags of popcorn and a big Hobbit hug.
And it's his official Oscar pick on that episode, which is hilarious in itself. But even more hilariously, this thread is continued into the Oscar special. Knowing Gregg's ego forbids him from ever admitting he's wrong about anything movie-related, you can track how Gregg invents for himself a new way to claim The Hobbit will win despite not being nominated.
A lot of the voters didn't get to see The Hobbit until this last week. We already know that The Hobbit is going to win, but you have to go through this fake out where they have all these movies that were nominated that would never win.
The rest of the evening is essentially comprised of a series of lackluster segments before the inevitable meltdown at its climax, which I'll get to. Another very important aspect of the Oscar specials are these segments, and especially the inevitable arguments they inspire. Speaking of Gregg's inability to admit he's wrong, Stump the Buff is an obvious example.
I've got a little video game here called Stump the Buff.
This is a segment in which Tim asks Gregg movie trivia questions.
How many Oscars did your favorite movie, Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, win?
These always cause arguments because Gregg will argue to no end when he gives a wrong answer.
14.
No, it's 11.
Gregg is so good at coming up with justifications for why he's right that somewhat makes sense while still obviously being fabricated excuses.
Well, it won 11. It won 14 because there were 3 producers on the film. Each one of them got an Oscar.
While none of the segments are too contentious in the first annual, they're all hilarious and lay the groundwork for the coming years. For example, we get the first of many Oscar on location segments. This is a hilariously inept edit of Gregg walking around the Dolby Theater with terrible audio issues, pointless comments, and these insane interludes with goofy music over Oscar-related B-roll. Gregg is just walking around the exterior entry section of the theater that's open to the public, talking about The Hobbit and saying what he sees.
The
Hobbit will be on this wall of fame as well, probably in that spot right there.
When he teases a look inside the actual auditorium, the camera just zooms in on a picture of it. It really highlights the overall idea that they're acting like they have exclusive inside information on the awards, but really it's just stuff that everyone knows. Tim's reactions to Gregg's segments are always a point of interest, and a running theme of the Oscar specials in general is for Tim to for some reason never watch or approve Gregg's segments beforehand, even though their lack of quality often sends him into a deeply angered frenzy. The Oscar on Location segment is shown early in the night, so Tim is able to muster a positive reaction.
So that was actually where the Oscars is filmed. Very interesting. Thank you for that report.
But later in the night, his reaction to another of Gregg's segments is markedly more negative. Gregg produces a segment in which he interviews actress Candy Clark and essentially ignores her perspective entirely and makes this segment all about The Hobbit as well.
Do you think that it's possible for a movie such as The Hobbit to win the Best Picture based on a write-in campaign?
Tim's anger at this is abundantly clear in his reaction.
Stop fuddling around with that. You never really asked Candy Clark what it was like to be a part of the ceremony. I mean, that's really what I was hoping you would discover.
Like I said, he never stoops to full-blown rage in this one, but rather quick bursts of negativity and frustration. He even uses this moment as competitive leverage as he compares the guest he brings on the show to the one Gregg had interviewed. As is standard fare with On Cinema in general, the relationship, and most notably in this exact segment, the competition between Gregg and Tim, is the driving force at the core of all of this humor. It doesn't matter to Tim the content of his segment. In fact, he largely ignores and is rude to his guest. He doesn't even let him sit down. Instead, the point Tim chooses to focus on is that his guest was more Oscar adjacent than Gregg's Oscar adjacent guest was.
Your Candy Clark interview, she was nominated but didn't win, but you were in a movie that actually won the award for Best Picture.
Yeah,
and that, I got John Prea from Our Godfather, from Godfather 2, to be on the show. And back to the Oscars.
There is just so much funny Tim and Gregg relationship stuff to unpack here. Although for brevity's sake and my sanity's sake, I will refrain from detailing all of it. This video is my first attempt at being a little more concise, but I'm bad at it. Oh well. Along with Tim and Gregg's first attempt at creating a special like this comes a whole lot of embarrassing chaos.
This is the first time we're doing this, so we're maybe like the Academy Awards. If you saw the first Academy Awards, they were not perfect.
Creating something like this would be one thing, but On Cinema being the ever-generous purveyor of immersive unfiction that it is, the On Cinema Oscar specials are actually produced as live stage events and live streamed during the awards. You have to admire the authenticity in that. It introduces a whole heap of technical and logistical challenges for the production. Plus, the actors are performing these essentially hours-long plays in which they're improvising their dialogue. Unlike the Academy Awards, the Oscar specials are designed to go wrong in very specific ways that require genuine performances and attention to detail to maintain believability. It's incredibly impressive when you think about it just from a technical and performance standpoint, especially when you realize that they've nailed it 11 years in a row. Despite the challenges it brings, the change of medium to this long-form live format also allows a number of elements that make the Oscar specials really unique and hilarious in their own way. For example, in the first annual, a staple of Oscar special-specific humor is introduced. I'm talking about the editing style and the various live overlays and images on the screen that accompany everything that's happening. It seems like a small thing, but it's used so cleverly in such funny ways that if it were missing, it just wouldn't feel like an Oscar special. It's almost like a sub-commentary on what's happening that pops up at the perfect times.
Jim, we're live.
Okay.
And it has the potential to take funny moments over the edge into absolutely hilarious ones. Sometimes they match or contradict the conversation taking place in ironic ways.
Hugh Jackman.
And sometimes they serve to punctuate jokes. You can think of them like tags that come after the punchline in stand-up. It becomes especially powerful closer to the end when chaos has erupted on the broadcast. Tim is hunched over, throwing up into Gregg's box of videotapes, and an overlay of Steven Spielberg smiling crossfades in. It almost serves to remind you in that moment of what the show you started watching was supposed to be and how far it has devolved into whatever insanity is happening. It's such great so bad it's good style editing.
If you like so good it's bad.
Look at this one moment where the editor seems to get bored and play around with matching the overlay up to the TV. I like to imagine in universe it's just some unpaid intern helping with the stream, watching the show fall apart, trying to keep himself busy by playing a little game. Another example, in Gregg's Candy Clark interview, the clip they show is not burnt into the live stream, but rather we cut to a camera recording a screen and a cursor clicking play. It's just the most basic, unprofessional level of production, and I love these kinds of details in the Oscar specials. It just adds so much to the feeling of pointlessness of it all. Another element that needs to be mentioned about these being performed live is that there are unintentional effects that come along with that, namely actors breaking or cracking up. It is completely bewildering to me how they aren't laughing through the entire thing and how they manage to stay composed through moments like this.
I've on the covers. Let's be honest, most of it is just popcorn and champagne anyways. Perhaps it could be like a memory for you of just clean it up and
This is a
forget
bad
it.
memory.
But there are certainly close calls and even full-on breaks. This is present in nearly every Oscar special, but given it's the first one they did, the first annual has by far the most of this, which is something I feel makes it stand out in the pack.
Nominated, or it wasn't nominated, he should have been nominated.
Best Supporting Actress. So this is a little bit of a weird category for me.
While it does break the immersion momentarily, it's always so funny to watch Tim and Gregg crack each other up, and it's a beloved element that's mostly unique to the Oscar specials due to their format. The live format also incorporates the crew and production into the discussion in a way that is largely ignored elsewhere.
The films that
Give me that goddamn thing.
changed people's lives and won Oscars, and I was wondering if you could sign. I
Here you go,
happen to have with me here
asshole.
today.
I'd say this becomes more relevant in later specials as we say meet the caterers or the production becomes more elaborate, but I think it's important to note now because on normal episodes of On Cinema, we usually aren't getting a whole lot of discussion on the actual production of their show. In the Oscar specials, it becomes a part of the story. The characters are not pretending they aren't in a live production as actors in a play would be. So when things go wrong, we get candid reactions and discussions about the shortcomings.
Whoever did that is a bullshit artist and shouldn't be working on this show.
There are so many great moments that come along with this. Though Tim has his little spats here and there, barks at Gregg, the crew, or Seth MacFarlane for doing a bad job hosting the Oscars,
This Seth MacFarlane, who hosting Oscar right now. Fuck him. He fucked everything up, and I hate this show, and I hate being here.
his signature unbridled rage is noticeably mostly absent from the first annual. Though its partner in crime, Tim's drinking, may be the most prominent it's ever been.
This is kind of neat. We got champagne here.
This is Tim and Gregg's first attempt at stretching the show's format into a multi-hour event. This Oscar special is an exploration of the effects of that. Tim's inability to hold it together as a host for that extended period of time, and Gregg not being prepared to deal with it. Up to this point, we've only seen Tim trying to remain professional for 10-minute episodes. Now, we have a treacherous combination of a multi-hour live event and Tim drinking champagne.
I'm on Percocet as well.
The first Oscar special is a national treasure for introducing us to the one and only drunk Tim.
All right, so put on the awards. The Oscar for Best Oscar, it should be for him, Billy Crystal. Red carpet. Hey, buy my mug. Buy my mug.
Tim is so good at portraying a gradual decline to the eventual breaking point at which he's far too hammered to recover the trajectory of the show. So, on top of the already shaky start the evening is off to, our host is now drunk.
How drunk are you? Scale of 1 to 10. 10. As drunk as I've ever been.
10, starring Bo Derek and Dudley Moore.
I would still today maintain that this performance might be the best drunk acting we have ever seen from Tim, which is saying a lot.
Because champagne got the best of me tonight.
Drunk acting can often come across as forced or ineffective to me comedically because when a lot of actors try to act drunk, they slur their speech or mimic the impact on their motor skills, but the most important element in a really funny drunk performance is missing. Tim Heidecker is one of the best drunk actors out there for this very reason. What he does so well, which is so especially evident in the first Oscar special, is realistically portray not just the drunkenness, but the character's struggle to present as sober while being drunk. Or at least present well, if not sober.
Congratulations to Oscar for Certainly for Sugar Man.
Much funnier than Tim simply being drunk is his desperate attempts to keep his posture under the influence, as if he was fooling anyone. That anyone would still be getting something out of his Oscar commentary at this point, if they were in the first place. You can actually see his struggle to maintain that equilibrium all the way up to the point that he can no longer hold it in. At which point, his demeanor abruptly switches to dramatic disappointment in himself, frustration, and hysterics.
I wanted this to go well for you, to watch this and be for this to be like a TV show about Oscar.
Tim's drunk acting is consistently impressive, always just so damn funny, and it's a key element in a lot of the craziest moments these specials have become known for. As a companion piece to the Academy Awards, the Oscar special is inherently climactic and grandiose. It often serves like a pseudo-season finale or a special event episode in the show's narrative. In the spirit of Oscar, everything is heightened, from Tim's rage to Gregg's ego to the events that occur. Because of this, we get some of the most dramatic and even darkest moments in the show's history during these broadcasts. This will become far more relevant in the later videos because the later Oscar specials really ramp up the insanity of their finales. But the first annual certainly doesn't lack drama. It has the very first big blowout and first major chaotic meltdown of the entire series.
First of many.
Of course, this stems from Tim's drinking, but the fun certainly doesn't end there. Unfortunately, Gregg's precious VHS tapes are collateral damage to Tim's meltdown as they end up covered in his vomit.
I'm gonna go now.
Gregg storms out, and an entire section of this Oscar special is Tim on the phone with Gregg pleading with him to come back and using his position on the show as a bargaining chip.
I will make you the co-host of my show if you come back.
Gregg agrees to come back on the condition that he is made the co-host of On Cinema, a concession which he insists Tim makes into the camera so that he's unable to go back on his word.
Gregg Cinema Turkington is the co-host of On Cinema.
When Tim does go back on his word on a technicality,
You are the co-host of our On Cinema Oscar special.
the ensuing argument is so endlessly funny because it comes directly after such a long negotiation and so much interpersonal turmoil.
Calm down. We're not on camera. I want to
No.
talk to you for real. For real.
No.
For real.
No. No.
It appears the tide has settled, but the rug is again pulled and the feud resumes. Not only is this whole section absolutely hilarious, but it's really very significant in the big picture of On Cinema, especially looking back on it after all these years. I would argue this is the first time in the series we really meet Tim and Gregg. That is to say, we finally see their true selves. It's the first time Tim's truest colors are laid bare, as he's too drunk to care about putting on another face. His blatant dishonesty and trickery is on display for all to see as he makes his promise directly to camera, only to 180 based on semantics.
You are the co-host of the Oscars, the On Cinema Oscar special.
Gregg is ready to leave the show for good, and we hear his completely genuine reaction.
Forrest Gump covered in your champagne and Frito-Lay vomit. It just doesn't make me feel good.
It's the first time we encounter him as a man no longer fulfilling the role of expert on a movie show, but instead as a voice on a phone who feels he's been wronged. Looking back at all that's happened over the years with these two, the first Oscar special is worth a rewatch for that very reason. See you at the second annual.